Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our DFI Masterclass about assessment in the age of AI. My name is Claire Behrens-Eitel, and I am the Associate Director of Instructional Design at the Digital Futures Institute at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I have joining me today, Colleen Chung, who is one of our Instructional Support Associates. Colleen will be keeping an eye on the Q&A box. So if you have questions, please put them in there and Colleen will either answer them or we'll answer them at the end together. This webinar is being recorded to be sent out afterwards with all of the resources that we're going to chat about. And like I said, just put your questions in the Q&A box. I always like to give a little disclaimer at the beginning of these webinars about generative AI tools and its use at Teachers College. So all of the tools that I'm using today have not been vetted by or endorsed by Teachers College. They haven't been approved, so we're just kind of showing them as samples, and you kind of have to take on the responsibility as a user to conduct your own research and look into how those tools are using your data and all that good stuff. So the facilitators today, me and Colleen, are basically just AI users just like you. Okay, so let's get started. So today we're going to talk about AI and assessment. And I feel like the big thing that we've heard for the past year since AI has really kind of taken off in education is my students are cheating. How can I know if they're cheating? How can I detect if they're cheating using AI and all that stuff? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is technology and education in general. Now, I used to be an elementary school teacher before I came to TC as an instructional designer. And so I feel like technology and education is something that is always evolving. And I like to think back in history about all of the new technology that kind of came around and scared people at first. So the first being calculators, which seems like such a silly thing to be worried about in the day and age that we live in now. But really in the 1970s, when calculators started to be introduced into classrooms, there was a lot of controversy around the introduction of them. So there was the idea of, will students be using them to cheat? Will they replace their abilities to do math by hand? Things like that. And then they adopted it and over time began to see the value in that technology as a tool. Moving forward to the mid 1990s, when the internet really became widely available for school use and for students and educators, there was a lot of fear around that technology being introduced. So fears about students Googling everything, educators are going to be replaced by the internet. Is it going to take my students away from physical books and stuff like that? One article that I found really interesting about this kind of technology boom and worry was an article from 1998 called, oh, hold on one second. The internet isn't a threat to students, it's a tool for teachers. And I thought that that article title was really interesting because it reminds me a lot of the articles that you see now about AI. So is AI replacing teachers? Is AI hurting students? So I thought that that article from 1998 was funny because it reminded me of a lot of articles we're seeing now about AI. Now the internet in 1990s and now in 2000s, I think another fear that's kind of been introduced into technology and education are one-to-one devices. So students having their own Chromebooks or iPads in the classroom, things like that. So there was a lot of fear around that happening. Is it going to be too much screen time for students? Are students going to forget how to write by hand? Are they going to not engage with other students in a good way? When in reality, one-on-one devices really helped a lot of students with disabilities. When COVID-19 happened, it helped that continuation of education, good or bad, whatever came from it. I think it gave instructors a way to reach their students as much as they could. So I always like to think about this kind of trend in history about technology and education and how it's really been shaped by really big things happening and people being really upset or scared of them. So I think that's always kind of a really interesting way to think about AI is it's this big tool that is a little scary because it came really fast, especially the generative AI tools that we don't really know a whole lot about. So I want to talk a little bit about that idea of cheating with AI. So cheating in AI, like I said, it's probably been the number one concern about AI that we've heard at TC. And I'm sure you as educators or just people in general have heard as well. And I wanted to kind of highlight a really interesting study that was done by Stanford about cheating. So in this study, they survey students, and one part of the study that I took to put in here was before ChatGPT hit the scene, some 60 to 70% of students have reported engaging in at least one cheating behavior during the previous month of them giving the survey, which is like a crazy number. 60 to 70% is is a big number. And then they also said that in 2023, they added in questions about ChatGPT specifically, and they said that that percentage stayed the same or decreased, even with those questions in there. So I think that the thing about the cheating portion of it is that, sure, that is a fear, but my personal opinion as an educator is that if someone's going to cheat, they're going to find a way to cheat regardless, using AI, using Google, having someone write a paper for them. Cheating is cheating. And I think the real interesting way to kind of look at cheating is thinking about, why are my students cheating? Like, what is leading my students to feel like they need to be cheating? So this was a really interesting study. I'm going to send it out with the slides and the recording afterwards, but I always find that to be such a fascinating statistic, 60 to 70% of students reporting that. So if you're sitting and saying, Claire, oh, cheating and AI, it's all fine. What do we do? Where should we go? So I want to start first with what we shouldn't do. So not the answer to that question, the two things that you shouldn't do are, one, use AI detection tools. So AI detection software, Turnitin, all of those, they've been proven time and again over the past year or so that they don't work. They're inaccurate. They've been shown to be biased towards English language learners. The companies have even said there's no guarantee of accuracy with those. So I feel like the AI detection tools aren't reliable. And they can also create an environment of accusatory, you did this, but I don't have any way to show it. The second thing that you shouldn't do is banning these tools in the classroom. I really believe that when you ban a technology tool, or really anything, first of all, people want to use it even more. I think that that's kind of been proven. And the second is that you're really robbing your students of the opportunity to learn about digital citizenship and to use these tools properly. So teaching them how to understand the misinformation that can come from using these, and how it can create hallucinations in its writing and facts that aren't true. Because if you think about generative AI tools right now, regardless of if you're talking about a fifth grade student in history class or a graduate level student who's 30 years old, all of those ranges of ages, these tools are brand new to everyone. So it's really our job as educators to teach people how to use these tools to benefit them and to work with them, because regardless of if they're out there or if they're not, we need our students, and we as people need to understand, you can't just copy paste your whole paper from ChatGPT because it's probably spitting out a bunch of facts that aren't true. So how can you use this to benefit you, and how can you go through what it's giving you and make sure that it's accurate? So when you are completely banning something and saying, I don't want you to use this at all, first of all, it's not really realistic to do that. And second of all, you're not giving your students the opportunity to learn and to understand how these tools work, as something that they can eventually use in the workplace environment once they're outside of the education setting. So while that is a lot to kind of think about, I do think that it is responsibility of educators to think about those tools. So with calculators, thinking about how over years and years and years and years of introduction, math teachers learn how to teach students to use tools of calculators to benefit them in their lives. The same with the internet. Years and years and years of it being introduced, how did we as educators use the internet to teach our students to use it as a technology tool rather than as something that they can cheat off of and do all this stuff that we don't want them to do. So AI is really the same. It's just it's very fresh, and it hasn't been around for very long. So one thing that I really like about this idea of transparency, I just want to make sure I'm sharing my computer sound before I do this, is teaching students transparency with our assignments. So transparency in learning and teaching. So you're probably sitting and thinking, okay, that all sounds great, but how can I teach my students to use this in an attainable way? Because I myself am trying to figure that out as well. So TILT is the transparency in learning and teaching. And I really like this framework when you're thinking about assessment. I'm just going to play these 3 short clips. They're, I think, like 20 seconds long each. And they talk about creating purpose, talking about the task of the assessment, and then talking about the criteria.
When we ask teachers to be a little more transparent about academic work, all we ask them to do is to discuss with students ahead of time, before the students do the work, 3 aspects of the work: the purpose, the task, and the criteria. The purpose has 2 parts, really. What skills will the students practice from doing this assignment? And what knowledge will they gain from working on this particular assignment? And we ask the teachers to talk with students not just about the skills and the knowledge as they pertain to that one assignment, but how does that set of skills and that piece of knowledge relate to the students' real lives? The next thing we ask teachers and students to talk about ahead of time, before the students start doing any work, is the task. That's fairly simple. It's just, what do the teachers expect students to do, and how should they do it? And to provide some direction about this helps students produce higher quality work, because they waste less time figuring out how, and instead focusing on the task at hand. The last thing we want teachers and students to talk about explicitly together before the students start working is criteria. We ask for the teachers and students to come up with some sort of a checklist of expectations. But that's not enough. In addition to that, we want for students to see examples of what work looks like when it meets those expectations, and sometimes when it doesn't.
So this TILT framework, I think, is a really great, whoops, I skipped my slide. Starting point for talking about AI with your students and being transparent with your students about what you expect. You know, in my time as an educator, I feel like students who cheat, there's oftentimes a reason for them cheating. They don't feel confident in the materials. Maybe they feel like they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, and they're in a time crunch. It's like 1 a.m. before their paper is due, and that's their last resort. And then you're always going to have that kind of percentage of students that are just going to cheat because that's what they've always done. And, you know, in life, we all know you can't really change that. So I think it's a good place to start, of being transparent with your students. So when thinking about your lesson that will end with an assignment, make it clear to the students what concepts or skills they'll be using to accomplish those learning goals in that lesson. So saying to them, we're going to talk about the landscape of how high rent is in New York City. And you're going to use these skills to get there. You're going to analyze the market. You're going to write a literature review about XYZ. So you're telling them from the very beginning, before they've even learned any of this, what they need to be looking out for and what skills they need to be kind of internalizing before that assessment even happens. Next is thinking about your assignment where generative AI could remove undesirable difficulties for students and demonstrate how to use those tools. So when I say undesirable difficulties, I mean things like outlining maybe writer's block. So if I'm a student who has a really hard time getting started with something, how can a generative AI tool help get me started? Give me some ideas for where to start with my paper. Or how can generative AI help me create a writing outline to better organize my thoughts? Because maybe that's a reason why I have a hard time writing a 15-page paper about rent prices in New York City. So I think it's really important, and we're going to actually do a little activity about this a little bit later, of thinking about your assignments and maybe what struggles your students might have from the very beginning with that assignment, and making it a little bit clearer so they don't feel like they need to go to ChatGPT and just copy paste it and turn it in really fast. And then lastly is making your expectations clear around generative AI in general. So encouraging your students to ask if they're unsure of what they're doing would be cheating. Like if they say, hey, I use ChatGPT or Claude to help give me feedback on my paper, is that okay with you, from the beginning, so they don't feel afraid. And then last is creating that syllabus statement outlining those expectations. I know it's already November, so we're thinking about maybe our syllabi for the spring, but I have here a website of example syllabi policies that people from all over the world have submitted for their courses, and you can see that. And again, I'll send this out with the recording. But it's a really good example of what other instructors are doing to address generative AI use in their classrooms. So let's talk a little bit about AI resistant assignments. So this doesn't mean that students won't be able to use AI at all with them, but there are different types of assessments where maybe it's a little bit more difficult to just copy paste from ChatGPT and turn that in. The first thing that I think is really important to do when you're thinking about AI resistant assessment is to focus on the process of getting there, not the exact product. So how are your students getting to that product? Maybe you're having them do feedback, maybe you're having them do outlines, maybe you're having them do group work to get to that final product. Next is requiring self-assessment. So the thing that generative AI tools are not really good at doing is generating opinions. So if you have a student assess themselves and they turn in like a 5-paragraph essay about them assessing themselves, chances are they probably had the help of generative AI to do that, when they could easily submit maybe 2-3 sentences of, I thought I did great on this paper because of XYZ, or I struggled because of XYZ. Generative AI tools can't create student opinions because they're not your student. They're a technology tool. Next is to think about novel ways to present assessment. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but group work presentations, projects, video creation. So trying to think a little bit outside of the box rather than every single assignment is either a true false quiz or a paper that they're turning in. And then lastly is requiring multiple rounds of feedback to see student improvement. So maybe a student turns in their first draft to you at the beginning of the semester, you give them feedback, or you have one of the other students do peer review and give them feedback, so the student is constantly learning how to improve their paper. Or even if you're showing them, take your paper and this is how you can use a generative AI tool to give you feedback, that's another strategy that you could do. So let's talk a little bit about those novel assessment ideas that you can use outside of multiple choice quizzes and writing a paper. So problem solving assignments, make sure assessments include tasks that require problem solving, creative thought, critical thinking by your students. Now, it's funny because I was giving this presentation to my husband a little bit earlier today, and he brought up a really interesting point of, well, what if I am a professor that does want to have writing assignments? I would say if you're someone who wants to have writing assignments and you're really worried about students using generative AI in those writing assignments, to create a rubric and have one of those rubric tasks be personal writing voice. Is this coming from your personal perspective? So if you're reading a paper and you feel like, you know what, this sounds like it was written by a robot, you can dock that on their rubric and say, you know, I didn't feel like this was written in your own perspective. It wasn't your own personal opinion. It didn't come from your own creative thoughts, I don't feel. You can revise it and we can try again, or this is your score. I feel like that's a little bit of a gentler approach than saying, you cheated on this. I know you did, but I can't really prove it. So thinking now about group projects. So I always feel like a group project is a great way to get students excited and involved in their own learning, and get them to know their other classmates. So having students work together to present information to one another is a great way to kind of avoid generative AI assignments. Hands-on activities. So providing hands-on activities that can double as assessment. So doing like face-to-face role playing or think, pair, share inside of the classroom, scavenger hunts, study analysis, simulation learning. Next is authentic assignments. So assignments that relate directly to the real world where the students are telling you their own experiences. People love to talk about their experiences and love to share their experiences and things that they've done in their life. So creating assignments where they can do that, even if that's built into a paper, is a great way to kind of avoid the copy paste from generative AI. The last that I always like to do, and I don't know if a lot of faculty do this one, but it's use and assess AI. So creating opportunities where students can use AI and assess its response, looking for that misinformation, maybe noting where it did a really great job of covering that topic is a good way for students to learn that digital citizenship and to learn how to identify misinformation. So let's use AI to redefine an assessment. So I'm going to show you a quick demo. I'm using Claude. Claude is my favorite AI tool. I just like the way it writes. I think that it's a good learning partner rather than just kind of spitting out information. So I have my prompt here. I wrote this beforehand with some inspiration from another webinar that I attended on AI for education. So what I'm going to use AI to help me as a faculty member do is think about an assignment that I have and try and understand what barriers my students might face with the assignment that I have as it is. So my prompt that I'm going to use with Claude is act as an experienced graduate school professor, skilled at modifying instruction to accommodate student needs. Your task is to review the assignment instructions in triple quotes below and identify any issues with the assignment that are unrelated to literary analysis and might prevent students from demonstrating their learning. Some examples of these might include language barriers, learning disabilities, or executive function issues. So my assignment is examining the role of critical thinking in educational leadership. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm using the paid version of Claude today, but I have done this on the free version as well. I like Claude because the free version is actually their highest sonnet. Sometimes if it's the system's overloaded, it bumps you down to the second, but I've always gotten what I needed from the free version, but we're using the paid today. So I'm going to go ahead and put my prompt in and I'm going to see what Claude is going to give to me. So it's analyzing my assignment right now. And it says, I'll analyze this assignment. First, I noticed that the title provided is quite broad and abstract for students who, and then it tells me are non-native English speakers, have ADHD, experience anxiety around academic performance, have a processing disorder. And then it explains to me why this could create unnecessary stress or confusion. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask Claude to redesign the assignment instructions to accommodate the issues that it has identified to help me as an instructor understand these barriers that students might be facing and take some of their suggestions. The funny thing about these systems is they always like spit out like a 5-page essay when you ask them to help you do something. So this is a really important aspect of using these, is taking bits and pieces that you find interesting. And this is a good example that you could give to students of, here's how I'm going to use this tool to help me take bits and pieces to maybe reimagine what my lesson could be. So it's giving structure, requirements. So thinking to myself, oh, I guess I could provide more structure and requirements. I don't know if I'm going to do this exactly, but I might take some of its suggestions. So that is one way that you as a instructor or an educator can use AI to reimagine any assignment. And you can really do that for any level. So if you're teaching a middle school English class and you want them to write an essay on a book that you're reading, like Where the Red Fern Grows, you can put that in and say, what might my 7th grade students find difficulty with this doing? And you could even structure other lessons around that, how to outline your paper. You know, the interesting thing I always think is that K through 12 settings, you have so much more time to write and to understand and learn the writing process. And by the time you get to the university level, you're expected to know that, which is great. But the thing that I think is always missing in the higher ed level is that element of feedback. Whereas when you're in K-12, you constantly are getting feedback because, like I said, you're writing an essay like over a week's time, submitting different drafts of it, getting your teacher's suggestions on it. And by the time you get to the undergrad level or even the graduate school level, that kind of stops because I think it's assumed that you can do that on your own, when many times you can't. A lot of people can't. I know I myself am not great at giving it going through and editing my own papers. So that's where generative AI really can act as a teaching assistant, is teaching your students how can you get immediate feedback on your work to help you improve the work that you already have, and eliminate that anxiety of, wow, once I submit this paper, if it's not good, I'm going to get like a C or a D. I mean, I feel like when I was in undergrad, I had my sisters, my parents, my friends reading my essays, helping me improve on it. And students who don't have that, generative AI could be your sister or your parent or your friend reading your essay and saying, hey, you can improve on these aspects. And it's really important that we teach students how to do that so that when they do get into the workforce, they can continue to be able to do that rather than having that anxiety of, what if I don't do great on the first try? Because none of us really ever do super great on the first try at every single thing we do. Okay, so I want to just do a little bit of a call to action, a little bit of an ending, talking about 2 AI assignments that I see most often in the graduate school level, and kind of provide some examples of AI resistant activities that you can either use in its place or swap out for some of them. So the first AI vulnerable activity is a multiple choice exam. I honestly don't really know that a multiple choice exam is really that vulnerable to AI. I mean, the thing about a multiple choice test is someone's doing it on their computer, they can do anything. They can use their cell phone, they can Google it, which again, I don't think most students are doing. But some AI resistant examples for a multiple choice exam could be a personal reflection and experience-based assignment rather than just 10 multiple choice questions, a group or individual presentation, or a collaborative research project. The next is a written essay, and I think that this is kind of the big one that a lot of people really struggle with AI, because it is really vulnerable. I mean, I could type in my prompt and have it write a whole paper for me. And I think that's what the big fear is. So some AI resistant ideas for a written essay are a presentation for the class, of course, a workplace intervention project. So coming up with real world implications where they're maybe thinking about, how can I take this skill into the workplace that I'm going to have and create an intervention for it? conduct an interview of an expert in the field of study that you're doing and present that to the class, or present it in a written interview form to the submission. Performance-based assessment, so teaching a class, developing a workshop for their other students, doing a role play scenario that they're coming up with their other students. Create assignments that require personal experience and demonstrate critical thinking. So if you did want to do an essay, you could have students write about a personal experience, more so than analyzing something. And then, here's the thing about graduate school and higher education in general, is you are going to have to write essays, you're going to have to write lit reviews, you are going to have to analyze things. So when you're doing those, these last two bullet points really hit on, what if I want to keep doing my written essays? That's great, that's fine. Very practical, because that's what it is create that rubric for your written assignments, outlining what your expectations for a student's writing style is, and explain to them, by the time we get to our final, I'll have read enough of your work that I know what your writing voice is. I know what your perspective is, that you're coming from. And on this rubric, if you're not giving me your full writing voice and getting there, you're going to be docked X amount of points. And then give them other things that you're expecting from the paper. I think a lot of times people do use these tools in replacement of themselves because they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing exactly. So saying to them straightforward, this is what I'm expecting from this, and here's the rubric that you're going to be assessed on, again, eliminates that finger pointing of, I know you cheated, but I can't prove it. And then lastly is showing students how to use AI for feedback during the writing process. If you only have your students in class one day a week for 3 hours, you're not going to be able to provide them for feedback on every single iteration of their paper that they have. So how can AI act as a tool for that? Or even maybe pairing them up with other students in the class to be a feedback partner for the drafts of their paper could be another idea. Because I think with writing, for a lot of people who aren't great at writing, including myself, comes a lot of anxiety around, did I do a good enough job? Is this formatted correctly? Does this kind of come across as a good put together paper? And having that feedback partner can really make a huge difference for people who experience that writing anxiety. So, yeah, that's pretty much all that I have today. I do have some useful resources that I'm going to send with some lesson ideas and reflections that we've had some of the faculty here at TC put together. We do have a series of AI in the classroom video interviews of faculty that have been using AI in their classrooms, and then some creative ideas for AI in education. And then the AI for Education website that I mentioned earlier has a great prompt library. They're always doing webinars about AI in education, and they're just a really fantastic resource. So I just want to thank everyone for coming today for our quick little 30-minute webinar. And I really appreciate it. If you ever want to contact us, we're at Digital Futures Institute at tc.columbia.edu. And thank you.